Okay, this video is going to demonstrate some of the debugging tools that are present in Microsoft Excel. These are present both on the Windows version of Excel as well as the OS X version of Excel, and this is going to demonstrate the Windows version, but the tools are equivalent on the Mac side. It's just that the interface is slightly different. So we have a base case model here that we have been working with in different videos, and I want to simply talk about and demonstrate several debugging tools within this. So I'm going to come up here. Most of these are in the formulas tab. It's a formulas menu, if you will. Clicking on that will bring up the formulas ribbon. And over in this section that's titled Formula Auditing, there are several useful tools here. So in a model, it's very common that I've got some input cells and then some calculations and maybe one or two or more primary outputs. And it's also quite common that sometimes the numbers that I'm getting don't seem to make sense. And so more than likely there's some kind of error in my logic someplace in the model. And Excel provides a number of tools to help me try to debug that. And probably the most basic one of these is not only clicking on each individual cell and checking its formula, okay, which certainly I can do, and I can go cell by cell and do that, checking the formulas for the various cells. And that's my first line of defense against errors, is a very thorough check of formulas, especially critical formulas that are influencing the output. But if I want a little more perspective, what I can do is come up here and in the formulas tab in the formulas ribbon, choose this show formulas. And if I click on that, what happens is my spreadsheet itself, the internals of my spreadsheet don't change. What's actually stored in all of these cells is exactly the same as what's been there before. But now, instead of showing the results of formulas, the numerical results of formulas, I'm actually seeing the formulas themselves. And so I see that this B12 cell contains the formula equals B5 times B9, and so on. And the other thing that happens to make formulas easier to read is that by clicking this show formulas, Excel just automatically doubles the width of all the formulas. That's a temporary thing, so don't panic when you see that. When you're done looking at your formulas and you want to go back to the regular view, just simply click on Show Formulas again. It's simply a toggle that goes back and forth. Okay, so that's number one. That's very straightforward. You can also do that if through a keyboard combination or a keyboard shortcut. The Show Formulas and it shows you the keyboard shortcut. It's Control. It's like the accent character, but going in the other direction. So on my keyboard, it's that key is on the upper left of the keyboard. The other interesting tools here are trace precedence and trace dependence. Okay, now trace precedence applies when I've got a cell that contains a formula, and I want to know what cells determine the result of that formula. So if I click on, for example, annual profit or loss, and click on trace precedence here, what shows is that depends on the two cells that have sort of solid blue circles in them, annual revenue and annual total cost. And the interesting thing is, if I continue my selection on cell B16, if I click trace precedence again, now it will trace the precedence from annual total cost and annual revenue back to the inputs. Okay, that does get a little bit messy sometimes. It's a little bit difficult to tell exactly what those relationships are. You can always remove arrows. Okay, and if I just want to see, for example, what affects annual revenue, I can trace precedence and see clearly that that's unit sales price and quantity made and sold. Now, again, this is a very simple model. The logic is very simple, but you can imagine in a more complex case that this could be very useful if you've got a formula that depends on many different cells. The trace dependence works exactly in the opposite direction. If I want to know, for example, how an input is used in different calculations, I can click on the input cell. In this case, I clicked unit variable cost, and I did trace dependence. So if I click on that, that shows me that unit variable cost is only used in a direct way in one additional cell in the model, and that's in my annual variable cost, and that's a good thing. Okay. Now if I trace dependence again, still keeping my selection on B7 here, that will show me that unit variable cost affects annual variable cost first, and then in turn affects the annual total cost. And if I trace dependence again, it in turn affects the annual profit or loss, and that makes perfect sense. It's showing me how this unit variable cost is affected directly, or is influencing the annual variable cost directly, and then that result is then used in further calculations. What is often the most useful is to do this in a sort of one at a time approach, where if I want to check out annual variable cost and trace dependence, I can do that, see how that's calculated. I can also trace dependence and see how annual variable cost is then used in further calculations. So I see not only what happens before how do I get annual variable cost, but then how is annual variable cost used. These are very helpful tools for situations where you've got a little bit more complicated model and you're trying to figure out where you've got an error in that model, or to see if you have an error in the model. These are also incredibly useful if someone else has given you a spreadsheet that may not be structured terribly well, and you want to navigate and orient yourself to that spreadsheet. So again, very useful tools found in the Formulas tab of the interface, and I encourage you to use those quite a bit. Thank you.